Today I want to do something a little different. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, as you probably know, and recently I have been listening to a book called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. It's a book about uncovering the real causes of depression and the unexpected solutions. Right now, my depression and anxiety are under control, but I want to stay ahead of the curve, so I'm doing a little bit of research on how I can fight this in the future. And this book was recommended. I can't remember who recommended it, and it's interesting. And the part I was listening to last night was especially interesting. It was the chapter was on sympathetic joy and overcoming the addiction to the self. In a lot of cases, anxiety and depression, well, especially depression, come from being so inwardly focused, so focused on yourself, that it's easy to get derailed in your head, I guess. Anyway, what I'm going to try to do here, and I think I can do it, is to play a few minutes of this that I thought were especially interesting about finding joy in the happiness of others and using that as a tool to overcome depression. It's an idea that's not just good for people like me who struggle with depression. It's a great idea for everyone, I think. Oh, and before we start, I should note that this passage that I'm about to play for you deals a lot with envy. And that's not really something that I struggle with, or at least I don't think I do. What I'm really after here is the concept that it talks about. We pursue our own happiness, and sometimes that's a fruitless pursuit. Yet if we pursue the happiness of others, not only are we making the world a better place, but that can actually lead to improved well-being for ourselves. That's what I'm trying to show you.
Rachel didn't want to be this way. Like me, she's a strong proponent of skepticism and rationality, so she looked for techniques that scientific studies had suggested might have some basis in fact. And she discovered an ancient technique called sympathetic joy, which is part of a range of techniques for which there is some striking new scientific evidence. It is, she says, quite simple. Sympathetic joy is a method for cultivating the opposite of jealousy or envy. It's simply feeling happy for other people. Rachel guided me through how it works. You close your eyes and picture yourself. You imagine something good happening to you, falling in love, or writing something you're proud of. You feel the joy that would come from that. You let it flow through you. Then you picture somebody you love, and you imagine something wonderful happening for them. You feel the joy from that, and you let that, too, flow through you. So far, so easy. Then you picture somebody you don't really know. Say, the clerk who serves you in the grocery store. You imagine something wonderful happening to her, and you try to feel joy for her. Real joy. Then it gets harder. You picture somebody you don't like, and you try to imagine something good happening for that person. And you try to feel joy for that person. You try to feel the same joy you'd feel for yourself or for somebody you love. You imagine how good they'd feel and how moved they'd be. Then you picture somebody you really dislike or somebody you really envy. Rachel pictured the relative she's been jealous of. And you try to feel joy for them. Real, true joy. She said, when you're meditating, you may not feel that way at all. It might actually be almost killing you to say those things. You might hate the person and their success. But you say it. You do this every day for 15 minutes. For the first few weeks, Rachel thought it felt pointless. Nothing changed. But then she started to notice, over time she said, I don't feel that same churning punch in the gut. It's just not there. As she kept on practicing, she started to notice something more. Part of the point of sympathetic joy meditation is that you feel less envy, but an even more important part is that you start to see the happiness of others not as a rebuke, but as a source of joy for yourself too. One day, Rachel was in a park, and she saw a bride in her wedding dress with her groom posing for pictures. Before, she would have felt envy and comforted herself by finding some flaw in the bride or groom. This time, She felt a rush of joy, and it really lifted her for the rest of the day. She didn't feel that the bride's happiness took away from her happiness. She felt it added to it. She didn't start mentally comparing this bride to how she looked on her own wedding day. She would never see this couple again. But her eyes welled up with sympathetic joy. I asked her what it feels like. She said, "It's happiness. It's warmth. And it has a tender quality to it. It's almost like people become your children. That same tender, warm happiness you have for your child when they're having fun and they're happy or they get something they like. You can feel that for a complete stranger. And it's quite incredible. It's almost like looking at them through the eyes of a loving parent that just wants someone they love to be happy and have good things. And there's a tenderness to it for me." She was surprised that she could change in this way. You think that certain things aren't malleable, she says, but they completely are. Rachel looked at me and said, "I've pursued happiness for myself my whole life, and I'm exhausted, and I don't feel any closer to it. Because where does it end? The bar just keeps getting moved." But this different way of thinking, she said, seemed to offer a real sense of pleasure and a path away from the depressing, anxiety-provoking thoughts she's been plagued by. There's always going to be shit coming into your life to be unhappy about, she said. If you can be happy for others, there's always going to be a supply of happiness available to you. Vicarious joy is going to be available millions of ways every single day. If you want to look at other people and be happy for them, you can be happy every single day, regardless of what's happening to you. As she began to practice this, she realized it was really a radical break with what she'd been taught. She's conscious that to many people, this would sound like a philosophy for losers. You can't make it, so you have to get a thrill when somebody else does. You'll lose your edge. You'll fall behind in the constant race for success. But Rachel thinks this is a false dichotomy. Why can't you be happy for other people and for yourself? Why would being eaten with envy make you stronger? She felt she was slowly realizing that the things she'd been trained by the culture to envy were in fact the least valuable things we have. She said, "Who's envious of somebody else's good character? Who's envious of somebody else's wonderful treatment of their spouse? You're not envious of that. You might admire it. You're not envious of it. You're envious of other shit. You're envious of what people have materially or status-wise." As the meditation progressed across the years, Rachel began to see that even if she got those things, they wouldn't make her happy. They're not what matters. I think this concept could help tons of people with depression, Rachel said. Rachel has come to feel, she said, that you're planting seeds during the meditation, and it flowers spontaneously during your day and your life.
There you go. That is the passage that I found so profound. I found it so profound that I took a screenshot, sent it to myself, and said, I'm going to do a morning musings about this. And what's more, I'm going to do something that I almost never do. I already own the audiobook of Lost Connections. I'm going to order a print copy of this book so that I can read it more carefully, make notes, and keep this in my permanent library. I almost never go from audiobook to print book, but I'm going to do it in this case because I find Lost Connections so impactful. I wish I could remember who recommended this to me so that I could thank them. I hope that you found that passage interesting and or useful, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.